I'm Will.
And I'm Luke.
And this is Will and Luke Discuss,
a vodcast
and podcast
where we discuss content related to psychology,
personal growth,
self-development,
and well-being. This episode, we're discussing
Deep Work by Cal Newport, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. So, it's been a few weeks since we've been on the cast, and we're back, and we thought we'd choose one that kind of goes in line with some of the other topics we've covered. You know, stuff around kind of like lifestyle design, organization. I suppose just in general, we've kind of set up our environments, we've got our schedules, and now we're looking a bit more at kind of the nitty gritty of like, how do we do the deep work required to make good work and produce good outcomes with some of the content and writing and work that we're doing. I think it's certainly something we're interested in. I think as well, it's it was a nice, easy read with some good concepts that I'm looking forward to chatting. I think you might be in a better position to describe why we chose this book, and then we'll kind of get into the concepts, I think.
Yeah, well, it follows on really nicely. I think you and I both kind of implemented, if not all of it, then lots of parts from this Tony Robbins Time of Your Life program, which we did a podcast on, and then David Allen's Getting Things Done, and then this Building a Second Brain. They all sort of blur together into a personal productivity system, right? And for me, this was just like the next level. Like, if you've got all that in place, how do you really use your time wisely? Not just to get all the things done you want to get done, but to really focus on what really matters to you, so that you haven't just, bought cat food and done all your admin, but you've actually come out the end of your week feeling like, I've really achieved something. I've got something to show for myself. I'm learning more, and I'm being productive in a way that's actually adding value to, if not at least myself, then other people too.
I think also off the back of doing digital minimalism, thinking about, kind of unnecessary distractions and how our attention is drawn away from the here and now. And then also kind of linking that a bit to Carpe Diem that we covered as well. Yeah. This kind of relates a lot to the really focused work, the focused attention required to do good work and to deepen ourselves into the things that we enjoy. I suppose a good place to start would be what his definition is of deep work. So I guess I'll read that out and then we'll expand on it. So he says, deep work is professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. And it optimizes our performance. Yes, and he says, and the opposing side of that is shallow work, which is non-cognitively demanding, logistical style tasks, often performed whilst distracted. These efforts often don't tend to produce much new value in the world and are easy to replicate. So there are two main definitions, and I think it's it's pretty clear to me, and I think it certainly gets you thinking about what is it that we do the things we enjoy for and the tasks we enjoy and what's required of us to get the most out of those.
Yeah. So for me, I guess hearing that, it's like deep work is intellectually or cognitively challenging. Like, it's hard, it's difficult. And also it's he described distraction free. So like you're given a real long period of time without clicking on email or social media or doing the laundry at the same time, that sort of thing. Whereas shallow work's the kind of admin you can do whilst flitting between lots of different stuff.
Yeah. And I guess he goes on further to say the deep work hypothesis is the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare at the exact time it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. Right. As a consequence, the few who cultivate the skill and then make it the core of their working life will thrive. So he kind of goes in the first chapter about why this is so valuable, because the world is becoming so much more distracted. Kind of puts that down a lot to technology, but it's rare that people are kind of very deliberate and undistracted in their practice, and we're often expected to kind of multitask and kind of be on the end of the phone, end of instant messaging, and we find it harder to kind of block out time to do specific things well. We kind of try and do too many things at once and spread ourselves thin. Yeah. Some of the ideas he puts out.
Yeah, well, it stands out that technology is doing at least two things that are having an effect on deep work. So one, as you just point out, having all the social media, instant messaging, email means or just having the web to browse, there's far more things to be distracted about. You need never be bored because you can always distract yourself with new content, which just wasn't really the case before the internet. And so there's that. And because deep work, he says, is not just a habit, but it's actually a skill. It's like something like playing the guitar. You can't just do it. You actually have to practice and get good at it. So there's all this stuff out there that makes it hard to practice and that makes us worse at it. And at the very same time, this same technology is automating all the admin jobs. So at the very same time, it's harder to do deep work. All the jobs that require shallow work are getting more and more automated. And he's kind of predicting that eventually we won't need human beings to do shallow work because it will all be pretty much automated and done with technology, right? So deep work's going to be the only stuff left for us. So at the same time, it's becoming harder to do. It's becoming increasingly valuable in the marketplace.
Interesting. Yeah. I think the bit that stood out to me in why he says like deep work is so rare and so valuable is that there's kind of a bit of an emphasis on people being busy as opposed to productive.
Yeah.
And all these like instant messaging and these kind of like short, quick fixes like in the workplace. And, you know, obviously the wider impact of technology is kind of making us seem like we're busier because we're responding to multiple things at one time. But the actual the end product isn't as I guess productive as it could be if we'd kind of, you know, as we'll go into some of the strategies, like really focused in on like specific tasks and given it our full attention in order to create the best work. I think that's something I've kind of noticed, that people feel like they're busy and they're doing a lot of tasks, but actually they're not. The output isn't particularly unique or valuable.
I think this was on a podcast I heard him speak on or something with someone, and they were saying like, imagine. So we've now got email, right? And before that, we just used regular mail. Imagine when we had regular mail, people just sort of waited by their mailbox, checking it every few minutes just to respond to the letters that were there. It would seem absurd. And I guess his point was that no one designed the way we interact with new technology as efficient or productive or healthy or inducive to happiness or a good idea. It's just like we just sort of fell to it, like as the sort of the lowest common denominator. It fell into it, and it's not that things like email has necessarily made us more. It's not like we just replaced mail with email. It's that we've added loads of useless rubbish into it, which we never would have posted anything about on a letter, for example. And it means that now we're just getting like inundated with distraction rubbish. I think it's worth pointing out that Cal Newport wrote Digital Minimalism. So kind of he's I think Digital Minimalism probably builds off the back of this one, but I suppose he's talking a lot about, you know, how we there's kind of like this acceptance that technology's taken over, and it's almost like we accept a level of distraction that isn't good for us. And he's saying that there is another way, and it's also quite not necessarily technology focused, but in kind of doing lots of shallow work and not doing any deep work, that you kind of like train your brain to kind of take the path of least resistance, and it's a skill that requires training, I suppose. That seemed really key to me, because he said that often people kind of assume that they can do it, they just sometimes don't set aside time for it, right? But that's like saying, well, I can play the guitar, I just haven't really picked up before, you know. He's saying it's no, you really do need to train in it. Like he offers this not really challenge, but sort of training strategy of like, go on a walk, and he'll start off with 20 minutes and just try to concentrate on one problem you're trying to solve, whether it's I don't know, let's say you're writing a paper, like you're structuring this paper in your mind on this walk, and each time you find yourself distracted by something else, just pull yourself back and let's see how that goes. And he's saying, you know, the first time you do it, your mind will just be all over the place, but within a few weeks, it's kind of like mindfulness in a way, but on a specific topic, you'll be able to like maintain your concentration for longer periods of time. He says, and that's kind of crucial for any deep work to actually happen. And
also like train ourselves to kind of overcome our desire for distraction.
Yeah.
says that we're very easily distracted by certain things, kind of, eating and social media and TV, and like we're finding it harder and harder to kind of sit with ourselves and sit in silence and work through problems, and we're kind of so easily distracted. I'd be interested to just kind of hear some of the other thoughts you had about kind of the importance of deep work, why it's so meaningful. I know I can imagine there being a tendency of this conversation to drift towards the technology side of things, so I'll try and redirect us if we go too much down that track.
We've done a podcast on that, so I hear that.
So I guess he's one thing I'll add to that. So he's he goes, deep work is meaningful, and he says there's a neurological argument for depth. He's saying that if we kind of what we choose to ignore and pay attention to greatly affects our lives. We think sometimes we think too widely on tasks and don't focus on kind of the nitty gritty day to day. And I think he's saying that if we continually engage in deeper work, we build neurological pathways in our brains to be less distracted and to focus deeper.
That makes sense to me. If you're training your brain to do something, it's gonna neurons that fire together, wire together, and all that. It's gonna. Was there a question in that?
No, not really. I think it was just something I thought was interesting. Like he kind of says there's like a neurological argument for it. There's like a psychological argument for it, where he draws on that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the guy who wrote Flow that we nice. Covered. I got that right this time. I spelt it terribly on my page, but I said it right. So his definition of flow, which we've covered before, we know like the best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. So I guess that makes me think, kind of doing deep work is kind of being in the flow state, really, isn't it? That it's you're really kind of fully engaged in what you're doing, so that kind of loss of self and really immersing yourself in the task you're doing. Well, you sure. I guess that's where it becomes like, we've talked about why it's rare and why it's valuable in the marketplace. But I guess here we're talking about why it's nice, why it makes us happy, why it feels good to do deep work. It's not just like, you might make more money or be more likely to have a better job. No, it's actually, it's rewarding, like it's internally fulfilling. And I guess, if you get good at it, the idea is, you'd induce these flow states, as you mentioned, that we also covered the book Flow. And and that feels good. People are most happy when they're in those flow states. He says that there's some there's like a philosophical argument for depth as well. He says like that we he says it's not just about finding meaning, but cultivating an already existing meaning within us. And I think it's probably quite a hard thing to describe, but I guess I was thinking about like when I was when we were like a bit younger and there was less kind of, I feel like there was less distractions, maybe just less responsibilities, but like I was able to kind of get into those kind of like mental spaces that felt a bit more sacred, a bit more peaceful, a bit more undistracted. Like, even if we're, playing football up the rec, we're just like totally immersed in that moment. And I just feel like everything we did when we were younger was kind of in and of itself. There wasn't like competing demands, or we weren't thinking about being somewhere else when we were doing one thing at a time. And I think that's just something you can get into a more kind of like, sacred, deep, meaningful space when you're just kind of really focused on doing one thing at a time. It's, if you're having a coffee with a friend and you're having a deep conversation with them, I guess this does, just kind of expand. This probably goes beyond work in a sense, or maybe I'm just broadening it to that, but like,
sounds like flow states more widely that you're talking about.
It's sort of like, if you are kind of having a deep conversation with a friend and you're, not distracted by your phone, you're not wanting to be anywhere else, and you're kind of really paying attention. That's more like, that's good for us, like philosophically, like it's good gives us kind of depth in all our interactions. Constantly wanting to be somewhere else.
Definitely. Yeah. I was thinking when you brought it up, what is the difference between flow and deep work? But I think you've kind of nailed it there, that you can have flow without it being deep work necessarily. You can have flow playing sport or engage in a conversation where you're not necessarily going to the crux of your intellectual and cognitive capacities, but you're on the edge of something that's keeping you really present and engaged in the here and now. And that's meaningful. It's feels good. We always come out of those experiences being like, yeah, that was a good day.
I think I think it might be good to touch on to, part two, he talks about the rules of deep work. So I guess we've given it a bit of an overview about like why it's important and why it's rare and why it's valuable.
Yeah. So he the book's in two parts, right? The first part, he sells the idea to you. It's like, this is why like you should do it. This is why it will be of benefit to like, I guess, your career and why no one else is doing it and why it will feel good and make you happy. Now, part two, here's how to go about it.
Part two, rule one, work deeply.
Just do it.
Quite fun. I think the bit I liked about this, the beginning of that chapter, he talks about like willpower. Yeah. That we kind of we have a finite amount of it. So it becomes depleted throughout the day. And it did make me think about, how like throughout a day, you're not always going to be able to have the ability to kind of put your full energy into absolutely everything you do. And I guess that goes back to something we spoke about another podcast about doing those kind of more routine, menial tasks at certain points in the day, once you know where your energy level, I guess I'm relating willpower to energy level slightly, but he's saying that, kind of by adding routines and rituals, we minimize the amount of willpower we have to use. And I'm sure we've touched on that in another podcast by like, by choosing your clothes you're going to wear the day before, or packing your gym bag before you go to the gym. Right. You're removing like road bumps, decisions. Decisions. Yeah. Kind of if you run into the gym and you haven't got all your bags ready, or you're kind of rushing into work and you haven't got your lunch, and there's so many, I know they're kind of like menial examples, but by kind of giving yourself structure and routine, you give yourself a better chance of kind of being ready to deepen when it's time.
It's like you're clearing your plate, right? Like that's a really good example of their administrative tasks, aren't they? Like pack your bag for the gym, make your breakfast or lunch or whatever. And you can do that at the end of your working day when you've kind of zapped most of your cognitive energy. They're sort of simple tasks, but if you do them in the morning instead, that's just taking time and decision-making capacity away from this depth we're talking about trying to get into. I think that's so it's about I guess treating these deep work periods as sacred and really making space for them.
And we need to recharge ourselves so we're ready to do the deep work. And I think that's where this book is really kind of asking you as well to look at like, what is your current lifestyle? What are your energy demands? What is the deep work you actually need to do? And then it kind of asks us to decide on a depth philosophy. So like to fit our specific circumstances. And it was kind of interesting. Like you were talking then about like, it's almost like we were morning people centric in what we were saying. It's kind of like, packing your bags, get ready for the gym in the morning. And you don't want to do that like first thing in the morning, or, you want to do the menial task late at night when you're tired. Like some people might be, some people might be totally different to that. So I guess it's
definitely.
Yeah. And look at your demands as well.
But you and I are morning people, aren't we? I think we both established that.
And also thinking about, what are your kind of your lifestyle demands? If there's some people here with some people with kids, some people with 2 jobs, or they do shift work or night work. Like there's so many different things to take into account, but he does go through like the different types of philosophies, kind of ranging from taking a whole month off in the woods to kind of doing little like pockets of deep work.
Before we just dig into that, you touched on something that I think is really important, which might not be immediately obvious, but so working days, let's, take bankers' hours, sort of 9 to 5 thing. That's what, like 8 hours working day people sort of think of as a working day. But really, he's saying with deep work, like even a pro at deep work will max out by like 3 or 4. And if you're new to it, you're thinking like 90 minutes is probably most you'll get out in a day of actual deep work.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's so despite that, he's saying, it's still so difficult for most people to fit that into a day, absolutely undistracted blocks of time like that. But still, we're not talking about a whole day of deep work here. We're talking about trying to find, a matter of like 4 hours max to And I think that's quite sort of encouraging in a strange way, because I don't know. I've spoken to a friend who's a writer and editor, and I know with my job as a psychotherapist, I sometimes mentally compare myself to the hours someone might work in admin or retail, and not to like diminish that work, but like I sometimes think, I don't work as many hours as they would, and it's like, well, of course you don't. The work's different. Like that. You won't have the capacity to do a certain type of work for that amount of time. And this sort of, I don't know, established for me that was okay.
Yeah, exactly. I know you've spoken before about like how much like emotional energy goes into doing your job, and like you could, what's the equivalent in another job,
right.
So there's different levels of energy we're talking about here, aren't we? As well, like your mental capacity. And this is where he's asking us to, think about like, where do you work? So the physical setting in which you work, for how long do you do that work? And when you'll start, when you'll finish, how you'll support yourself through that. Like, do you need complete silence? Do you need to be able to kind of go and socialize every half an hour to go and see people? Like it sounds really varied in a way. It's like what really working out, like what facilitates you doing your best work. And I think, again, like broadening work as well, with that's kind of even just reading or writing, or when you're at a job, like when it's time to do like the case notes for your job, like how do you really zone in those moments and free yourself, and how do you replenish yourself in between those things? I'm thinking for you, if you've got half an hour between clients that you're seeing, like how do you recharge yourself in order to kind of dive back into that deep work? And how do you make sure by the fourth client of the day, like you've still got that same energy to give, and that same willpower, I suppose, to kind of give the best to yourself and do the best unique work you can, despite it being the fourth person of the day.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's actually really interesting. It gets me thinking, even like as I was reading the book, like my phone would go off and I'd check my phone. Did you find? I don't know if you found that, but I kind of like to chuckle to myself a little bit, or like kind of get halfway through a chapter and check my email. And I think it kind of goes back a bit to, when you're packing to go on holiday, and it can take like either 3 hours if you do it, or it can take 30 minutes if you actually do it.
I think Parkinson's law, I think that's called, isn't it?
Yeah.
He talks a lot about it, and Tim Ferriss talked about it, didn't he? 4-hour work week.
You just actually kind of get on and do it. And I think this is what another benefit of this system is, saying that like you're actually going to free up a lot of time. Like you can probably get things done a lot quicker if you're distraction free, and you're going to be more productive than busy. So I'd be interested to kind of go through the 4 philosophies. So the first one is the monastic philosophy. So that is what he describes as eliminating or radically minimizing shallow obligations. So kind of doing one thing at a time, taking a whole month off. So it's good for time pressure things with deadlines. And he's saying, this is something you psychologically commit to, and you can consider doing grand gestures like going on a big trip, or doing what J.K. Rowling did, like go and lock herself in a hotel in Edinburgh for 6 weeks, or you can do some quite novel things, just bugger off and get it done. That's kind of the grandest one. For
a long amount of time, shaping your entire lifestyle to facilitate deep work, basically. And that might mean going to a new location, away from everyone, turning off all technology, and like really zoning in for perhaps months on end. So it's probably the one that, people are least going to be able or realistically do, but it's kind of like, the people who are serious about big work, like you say, J.K. Rowling, or it reminded me of The Shining, he goes off to a hotel. Doesn't get much done, but it's like you're really taking yourself off somewhere to get yourself in the right frame of mind, just where there's no distractions.
Yeah, for some people, that's just exactly what they need. Other people, that's just not even, they couldn't even think about doing that. I can't just leave my family and my job for a month. But it's worth considering. Like, I think some people can be, they're not willing to kind of even acknowledge that as an option. But it could be a case of, you could have like, a week away or something, or 2 weeks away. that might kind of move into another one of the philosophies, but it's worth considering, like, if that works for you, and whether you do just need to take like a month off work, or take 2 months off. And I guess 4-hour work week would kind of play into that a little bit. Kind of some of the strategies there, thinking about like how can you kind of have these mini retirements to work on other meaningful things or other projects you want to work on. Like, is it possible for example, like, I'm going to probably start studying again next year. Like, am I better off just kind of like taking annual leave for 4 weeks and just doing all my assignments in one go? Or do you know what I mean? Like, what ability do you have to kind of maintain all these different projects at one time? Sometimes it's better to do them differently. I know.
I see what you mean. Like, before just writing it off because you're thinking, well, my lifestyle wouldn't allow that. It's like, well, just stop and think, like, if there is something important to you, maybe once in your life you want to write a novel or write an album or something. And, maybe that would take just constructing an amount of time to take yourself away at some point.
I know Jay Shetty, who I think you might have heard of some of his stuff. He does, from what I remember, he does like videos, he does podcasts, he does like one-on-one coaching, and he'll tend to do like one whole week and do all his videos in 1 week. And then he'll do like one whole week and do like a whole week of writing, and then one whole week and he'll do like 2 podcasts a day for a week. Or I might be kind of maybe slightly misquoting him, but that's the general gist. He does blocks of time to do specific tasks, as well as so he kind of gets them all done in one go, and then like drip feeds them out.
That's great. It keeps and although that's we're talking on a grander scale here, I can really relate to that just in my day-to-day life, because out of the back of getting things done and building a second brain, like, my stuff's pretty streamlined, but I still end up with a daily to-do list which isn't well structured, and each time I find myself a block of free time, I'm having to scan it, and then my head's going in like 12 directions as I'm considering all of them and thinking which one to do next. And that's exactly not deep work, right? And it's like maybe just really splitting them away. Well, which ones of these are deep and which are shallow? Taking all the shallow ones, making sure they're all necessary for a start, perhaps culling some of them and just deciding I don't want to do that anymore. But and then just blocking them off. So I'm not dipping in and out of shallow work multiple times a day, but it's like, well, I'll just set aside an hour and do all my admin, at the end of the day. And because sometimes I get up, let's say before I've seen my first client, I'll look at this list, and it's tempting to get yourself what feel like the quick wins. So it's like, I can tick that box off quite quickly if I do this, or I do the next one. It's easy. Yeah. And then like you're getting a dopamine hit each time, but really it's not the stuff that when I look back at the end of my, day, week, month life that I'm really going to care about. So this book's really got me thinking about that. Like, how do I batch my shallow work into all in one go, basically, so I'm not distracted with it throughout the day? And where do I prioritize the deeper work I want to get on with?
He definitely talks about that in this book, about like, kind of batching those things together. And it makes me think about the time zones in the Tony Robbins program.
Yes.
And I remember like, what's the urgent but not important. Yeah. And that section where it's kind of like, you do need to kind of go shopping. You do need to kind of do some, I don't know, taxes or daily financial stuff or whatever. It's like, how do you streamline that for yourself in order to free up space for deep work? Because those things are kind of relatively shallow, kind of like admin based tasks that don't isn't what you're going to kind of want read out of your obituary, that what you did with your life,
and sometimes they are important in terms of like they're necessary in order to, you have to do your taxes if you don't want to go to prison and you're a freelancer or whatever. But like, there's ways to make it as you say, streamlined as possible, and to batch it in a way that you're not feeding it just all this like random bits of admin that I'm sort of finding myself doing in little chunks of time throughout the day. And it's kind of like reading this book, I'm like, nah, that's probably not the best way to do that. No, I'd rather have that larger chunk of time completely undistracted, where I focus on something important. Perhaps once all that energy is drained, save the easier admin tasks for after that later on.
Yeah. it leads a little bit onto the second philosophy, which is the bimodal philosophy. So saying like taking breaks and retreats for space. So dedicating clearly defined time and leave the rest to everything else. So typically a day or days at a time. So you're kind of having a couple of days off to go and smash out this project, or like, or a whole day.
A bit more realistic for a wider array of people here, rather than months at a time. We're talking a day or two at a time.
Yeah. Which I think people think they do, but they might spend those days or two like quite distracted.
Yeah.
Be like, today I'm going to finish this assignment, but they end up like, I'm talking about myself here sometimes. I'll be like, I'm going to finish like a whole assignment in a day. I'm going to finish like the book we're reading for the podcast, but then I kind of end up like drawing it out over way too long, or it sort of doesn't get finished. And I guess the part is, it's kind of like it's like taking clearly defined time. So it's almost kind of blocking out specific time for this, free from distractions. Like treating it as if it was, I guess if it's a non-work related task, like treating it as if it was work or something.
Yeah. So if you need resources, download it beforehand and just turn the internet off and put your phone on airplane mode or whatever, stick it in a drawer. Like really, you're still thinking that monastic way, but it's just, a day. It's not necessarily, you're not taking yourself out to the woods for a few months, but you're still wanting to treasure that time and see it in the same sort of way on you.
Mm-hmm. Then there's the rhythmic philosophy, which is, he says, developing a consistent habit of starting deep work so you don't need to decide when to do it. So the whole like James Clear thing around like don't miss twice.
Right.
So kind of like he says, like do the work every day, put it on the calendar, set a starting time, or things around like, write 4 or 5 pages a day. He says like with no time scales, if you don't have time scales for a certain project, this one's really good because you kind of keep yourself accountable to doing like, 1 hour of this project today, even if it's like, painting the house or something. It's like, right, I'm going to do every morning for half an hour. I'm going to do half an hour's worth of painting or something. I'm going to do half an hour of writing, or I'm going to read 1 chapter, like trying to give yourself like set things to do when everything kind of feels up in the air, which I think which I found quite useful. Like sometimes if like we got like a podcast on the go and then I've got some other, online courses for my volunteering, or there's multiple things going on. Sometimes it's kind of a matter of just like keeping yourself accountable to at least doing something to move that forwards, even if there's not a specific deadline to be working towards.
Yeah, I heard Jordan Peterson talking about when he was writing this book, Maps of Meaning, and he described it as I stole 3 hours of my day every day for a few months to do it. He was like, I got up at 5, and he was like, I mean, I stole it. Like my family needed me, my work needed me, but I locked myself away between like, 5:30 and 8:30 in the morning. No one could contact me, and 3 hours a day, I set myself to task in writing this book. And it just popped into my head. It's just this. I giggled because I forgot what you called it, but it sounded like the rhythm method.
The rhythmic philosophy. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're not talking days at a time anymore. We're talking like, this is the 90 minutes to 4 hours a day thing, right? You're finding that time where you're committing to it, you're blocking it out, and it's not all day. You're not necessarily taking yourself to the woods, but you're sticking to this way of working.
Something I try and do, like when I plan my week out, I see like pockets of time. I'm like, okay, that's like, I guess I might be a bit more like the final one, but in terms of like, I'm planning like like in that time, I'm going to do some deep work and really kind of shut off and do that specifically. It's
treating it with respect, right? Like if I've got a client, I'm not just going to like check my email in the middle of a session, am I? Like it's comical to think I would do that, and it's just treating your own bit of deep work with the same respect you would if you were meeting a client.
Exactly. Yes, I think we kind of presume that if we're not being watched, that it doesn't count. Like I was going to say, like kind of almost like imagining your boss was in the corner of the room, like watching you do your work or something. Yeah. Even if you're just kind of reading a book, it's like keeping yourself accountable to yourself. And personal integrity around like saying you're going to do what you say you're going to do. I guess the final philosophy is the journalistic philosophy. So this is like whenever you can find free time, dive in, and you can rapidly switch into deep mode between other things. It's not easy. It requires confidence. I mean, look, I think it's hard to imagine doing deep work without kind of getting like a little lost slightly. Like you kind of that just feels like it requires time. But some people, I suppose, are able to like. I guess you gave an example of like I think a guy like whilst his baby was sleeping, he'd like run upstairs and write a quick chapter of his book, and then run back downstairs. And whilst the lasagna's in the oven, run upstairs and read a chapter. And like I don't know, it's all.
I think you got to emphasize that this is called the journalistic philosophy because this is for people who have really already got deep work nailed and they're really confident at what they do. So like if you haven't, like you say, there's no chance you could just dive in when your lasagna's in the oven and start writing like the first chapter of a novel you've never started or done before in your life. Like this is someone who knows how to deep work, who has confidence with their skill, like whether it's, let's say it's writing, and so they can just switch into that mode. But it's going to sound the most tempting to the majority of people, but it's going to be the least probably possible for the majority of people because you have to really get good at it first.
Yeah. And it's kind of, it sounds like idealist. Yeah, it's one of the things I can imagine. Like you could think you were doing it, but you weren't. Like if you did it badly, it's kind of just like where you were in the first place,
right? Exactly.
Before you did all of this,
because it sounds the closest to most people's lifestyles already, right? But actually, it's really not. Like these people have probably gone through the monastic phase to get good enough to be able to, just jump into deep work in a moment's notice. For most of us, that's like, it's a real skill. It's a virtuoso deep worker.
I like that. I'd be interested just to talk a bit about, I suppose, like what are some of the other kind of tips and tricks and advice you feel like you picked up from this book? I know the other 3 chapters are around kind of embracing boredom, quitting social media, draining the shallows. There's kind of like a few other ideas in there. I'd be just curious to hear which ones you think you already implement or you would like to implement from this.
Well, I won't stick on it because that rule 3, quit social media, is pretty much expanded into the book Digital Minimalism, which we've already covered. But I don't have any social media, so that's a distraction I don't have. But I definitely fall into that trap of just checking things, checking the sports pages, checking my email. And I think that's probably at what I would want to do, what I plan to do, let's say, is really lock out some sacred blocks of time, which I do treat in the same way I would seeing a client, where I am setting myself a particular task at hand. And I think why I've struggled with that is because I haven't recognized, probably before reading this book, my mental capacity in a day. So it's like, if on my to-do list at the moment, it might have a bunch of admin, blah, blah, blah. And it might have something like, I'm making a website. So like writing my philosophy of psychotherapy for my website. So I'm looking at my to-do list. That's a piece of deep work. It's not a bit of admin. It's not putting numbers in a box. It's actually, I need to concentrate and think. So I might have that on a daily to-do list, but on that day I might have, 4 clients or something. And it's like the idea that I'm going to get to 5 o'clock with having seen 4 clients, chipped away at my admin and then just dive into that. It's like, I think I tell myself I probably can, but when it comes to it, I never can. Like that's just unrealistic. Yeah. And it's not because I don't have the physical time in the day necessarily, but it's because I'm sort of cognitively wiped, and it's the kind of thing I need to treat as just as difficult and prolonged a task as a psychotherapy session. And for me, I guess what I will think about more is when I have these daily to-do lists, really thinking about which ones are deep. And he talks about locking those into your calendar, because we touched on earlier this idea of if you give yourself a day, you were saying like, well, most people probably think they do that and then don't actually do it, right? It's like, well, why is that? If you're going to work for a day, obviously you're going to have breaks at some point, right? You've got to eat, you've got to go to the toilet, you've got to refresh your mind, get some fresh air. But if you don't tell yourself when, then you can just do that. Why not now?
Yeah.
Why not immediately?
Yeah. Yeah.
If I was going to hoover today, well, I could do that right now. So unless you kind of plan your day and block in those times, you haven't really got any reason not to drop what you're doing, to say, take a break. And so I think that scheduling is a good idea, which is counter to David Allen's getting things done, where he says only schedule things in the calendar which are definite things that can't be moved to any other time.
Yeah,
like appointments.
I think it sounds like it's it's like around keeping yourself accountable as well. To that, like if it's in your diary, then it's difficult. It's kind of slightly contrasting from his, but I feel like there's a real importance here in kind of treating anything that even if you're not being paid for it, like treating it as if it's work, right? And even treating your relaxation time the same way as well. Like my partner like schedules in like time to herself, like a specific time like in her calendar, like to herself to relax and have space. Right? I kind of didn't really think about that until she said it, but it's and he said like one of the things he says is like scheduling every part of your day, like being really like strict and stringent. I kind of didn't know if he was like saying that to kind of be bold and make a point, or whether he was like being dead serious about like every minute of your day plan out. But for some people that doesn't work, I'd imagine.
Yeah, well, I think if I get him right, I think he was saying schedule every part of your working day. And not so you have to stick to it. Like if things will come up which you just have to readjust to, and he was saying like as that comes up, think about your day as blocks of pieces, like pieces on a chessboard, and it's like, okay, you wake up in the morning, here are the pieces at play, where would you put them? And he's like, and put them on the board, put everything in each place. And when things, new things come up, something takes longer than you thought it would, and you decide, I'm in flow, I want to crack on, fair enough. But then the other pieces have to be rearranged. And he says, that's fine. He's not saying you have to stick to it, but you're giving yourself good reason to move things, rather than like, I'm feeling peckish, but I didn't schedule in when I was going to have lunch. So
that's it. Yeah. If you kind of feel like you've gotten really deep into something, and then something, I guess, less important or more shallow has to give, I guess you don't feel as bad as kind of if you were like, I just kind of couldn't be bothered, or I was hungry, or, just something else gets in the way, kind of, giving yourself good excuses to move things around. I like that, as opposed to kind of shallow excuses. Yeah.
Yeah. And he talked about having a ritual of ending the day as well. So it's like, once
I like
you
that.
Close up, he's like, give yourself a ritual of like putting everything to bed. So closing all the open loops. And that doesn't necessarily mean doing everything, but sort of in a David Allen getting things done way, you just like have them somewhere. They're in a calendar, they're on a to-do list, they're sort of wrapped up, that your future self will handle them. And then just don't do any more work for the rest of the day. Don't check your email after that time. Let's say it's 5 o'clock, your cutoff time. Once you have that ritual and you put it to bed, like he said, it's really important just to have free mental space. It's almost like sleep. It's rejuvenating. And
good. Yeah, I think he says like give room to be like lazy and allow yourself to like recharge and think. And also he talks a bit about like giving, like what you're saying back about the walking thing, like giving yourself time for like your subconscious to kind of like work things through. And we don't always have to be kind of like working on this like really high conscious level. Like sometimes we could just kind of give space. And I think that's what he's talking about, like with boredom as well, like giving your brain space to kind of work things through.
Okay. So I think they were slightly different, and I think they're important. So one was like a form of deep work where you're not sat, or you're not in front of a computer, you don't have paper, but you might be on a walk, and you're training your brain to stay on a specific topic. So this was like a training exercise, right? Doing scales on your guitar or whatever. You're training your brain to be able to concentrate on a difficult task for longer and longer periods of time. versus allowing, say, going on a walk for a different reason, just to allow your mind to go wherever it wants, right? They're both good things, but they serve different purposes. One's to train your deep work, and one's to give yourself that mental freedom to rejuvenate.
Mm-hmm. I think it's good, especially in between like cognitively demanding tasks, giving yourself that space to, it gets me thinking about like what refreshes me in between tasks. I remember when I was working at home last year, like what would I do? Like my lunch break's really important, like a chance to kind of like get out of the house and like recharge. And it's something it does to your brain when you kind of, you've had a bit of space, you feel more ready to kind of get back into the task. Whereas if you're kind of constantly going from one thing to the other and not finishing things, then it can be a lot harder.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been surprised so sometimes I would get to the end of like a working day, feel pretty wiped. And I just sort of thought that was it. Like I just kind of had to feel wiped for the last few hours of the day and then go to bed. And then I started I started doing some exercise then. And then suddenly for those last few hours, I'd feel a lot better. And it was counterintuitive, because I thought I was tired, but I was tired in just a different way. I was brain foggy. I couldn't really think. I was like sluggish. And so the idea of physically exercising was like, well, I'm just going to feel awful. But I actually came out feeling like amazing, went for a swim, and I was like, suddenly these last few hours I can be alert and enjoy it again.
Makes you think about sleep as well. It says like sometimes having like a little power nap after work, give yourself the rest of the day. Yeah, think about like those final 3 hours of the day after, I guess, a normal working day. Yeah. And he does talk about we often think that like we kind of need to like slow down towards the end of the day, but he's saying like human beings, what he says, like we don't realize the potential of the other 16 hours of the day. Like fill them. We're meant to be busy. Like go hard and fill your time and plan your leisure time as well. Like make sure you fill it to the. I think those days where I'm just like, it feels like life is so busy and I'm just like doing all these like deep things, and there's no kind of not that there's no space, but it's kind of like it's. I'm filling those hours that could easily be spent just in front of the TV or just being lazy or something. But I do like that. He says that leaves you feeling more relaxed and more refreshed when you've kind of pushed yourself harder. I found that kind of an interesting level of encouragement, I suppose, to be given.
Yeah. He really padded that out in digital minimalism, didn't he? The idea of like really doing meaningful leisure time as well. It's not necessarily deep work, but it's well, maybe it is sometimes. It's learning a new skill, or it's joining a book club or a football team, whatever, something that's social and important to you, perhaps.
We kind of think that like work's it, and that actually there's so much more time to do all these other areas of deep work we can do, and well, actually you feel more recharged after deep work than drained, I guess is his main output, main claim.
Yeah, and I think I get that. There are times where I've, let's say, done some sport or exercise after a tiring working day, and I find that I will sleep much better and then wake up much more rejuvenated than I would if I'd have just spent the rest of the day kind of what I would have called chilling out, lying around, not doing much of anything.
I've found that as well, like since I guess Melbourne's been in a lockdown for quite a long time. I'm kind of missing like the gym, and it kind of, in terms of like how that gives me energy in my working day, and then I'm sleeping better at night time, and just like the routine of getting up in the morning. It's just all like, without that, I definitely feel like my brain isn't firing in the same way as it was when that's kind of happening. So it's thinking about the things that rejuvenate you and energize you and actually doing them rather than taking the path of least resistance, which would be, playing on your phone or watching too much TV or getting the third takeout for the week. Any kind of final thoughts or things we haven't spoken about you wanted to
one thing that was still on my mind that felt important was, although we've defined deep work, it's kind of on a spectrum, right? And he had this section on like, how can you really tell if it's deep work or not? And he gave a rule of thumb, which is like, if you had to give this task that you're about to do to a pretty intelligent grad student, so someone early 20s. They're fairly clever. They've just finished a degree. Like, how long would it take them to learn how to do this task you're about to give them? And that gives you a sort of ballpark for how deep it is or not. You know, if you could train them up to do it in an hour, it's probably a fairly shallow task, right? Where if it would take them a few months to learn how to do this thing, then you're talking, okay, so yeah, this kind of counts as deep work. I thought that was quite helpful.
Good gauge, yeah, kind of like checking in on yourself about like how deep is what I'm doing, like, and how much time you're spending on it, and also just getting better at streamline
how deep the work is.
And like, as kind of back to like, also like just streamlining those really simple tasks, like just send like quicker emails and send like quicker. I think he talks in his book about like how like what kind of become hard to reach sometimes, like that's one of his things as well. Like, you know, make people who send you emails do more work, like make them become more specific and become more specific when you email other people. Or just like don't respond, which was quite funny.
He got Tim Ferriss in that chapter, didn't he? I loved it. It was like it was just don't treat email with the. It's somehow these cultural norms and assumptions and expectations have just evolved with the technology, which no one really signed up to or agreed to, but they're here, and it's just like some of them is like you don't owe anyone a response. If it's so easy for people, just anyone to reach out to you, like you might just decide this doesn't like this I'm not interested. This is too vague. I'm just not going to respond. I thought that was
it does like all this stuff definitely makes you like question the role of, I guess he does ask you like, you know, your tool selection, like what are like the distracting things? Like, is email distracting? Is text like, it kind of just sometimes it makes you just want to be like, I just don't want any of it. It's all just away. It's like thinking about like, what is it? If you took it all away, what would you bring back in purposefully? I guess then we're in danger of kind of starting to talk about digital minimalism again. But like, it's
Marie Kondo, your digital life.
Marie. Nice. We could make one big title going out of all the books you read. Cool. Well, that's kind of everything I wanted to cover. I kind of enjoyed hearing some of your personal exampple. Nice. I guess for me, the main personal example, I was, there's obviously quite a few, like, you know, I'm kind of reading and doing a lot of writing and even just kind of like getting back into socializing again, just like trying to just be with people entirely and stuff. Something I'm obviously working on, like my level of presence after being kind of, you know, not going out as much. But I certainly think like at my work, we kind of often go and see people, then we come back and do case notes. And there's times where it's like, you could spend like, you know, an hour doing a case note, but you're distracted, or you're kind of, you know, either checking emails or talking with other colleagues, and you know, all these things can be like useful and have their purpose. But it's kind of like, is there a way of kind of doing all those things separately? So when I'm doing the face-to-face, I'm doing the face-to-face. When I'm doing the notes, I'm doing the notes. When I'm asking my colleagues questions about X, Y, Z, I'm doing that. You know, so it's not kind of nothing. It can sometimes like just bleed into each other, apart from the face-to-face stuff, but it can often. It's just that task switching. I think it's a lot harder to task switch than we think.
I definitely relate to that. Like in an open office at an agency I work at, where it's like, it's trying to write notes there whilst there are other people around. It's like I'm having low quality conversations and doing low quality notes at the same time for a long amount of time. And you're right. It's like, if I just put myself in a private room, I can do a high quality notes in a short amount of time. And if I want to sit in the office and chat to people, I can actually look at them and engage, and we can listen to each other properly rather than half sort of chit chatting whilst multitasking on the shallow stuff. It's just takes up too much time. It's not worth it for me.
Deep work, all or nothing. Well, no, that would go against his in deciding your depth philosophy. Some of it is you can find balance. So but no, that's guess my personal example. Nice. I just wanted to kind of just let you know before we wrap up. But yeah. You asked me about any final takeaways. I guess that was your final example. Do you have any final key takeaways for you? It just makes me want to kind of get back into my good phone habits of like leaving my phone outside the room when I'm reading, or like, you know, or just kind of turning off notifications, or it just makes me want to do one thing at a time more. I think that's probably my main takeaway.
That's great.
Yeah, which is good. I suppose I'm just going to kind of keep trying to do that and minimize distractions and kind of see how I can implement that in the workplace, and how I can find implement that outside of work as well. Like even kind of going to the gym today, like like that's sometimes I like kind of having a workout where might make a phone call or play on my phone whilst I'm working out, but I'm like, is that really like the deepest workout I could be doing? Is this taking an hour and a half instead of an hour or something?
Okay. Yeah.
Just I guess I'm just broadening what he says as work itself. I'm just kind of applying this to every area of my life, I suppose. So
yeah. So like, you're kind of wanting to be in the moment, doing one thing at a time in areas broader than even deep work, but.
Could be study coming up, or face-to-face interactions. All right, so the next podcast will be coming up on screen now.
As you realise we haven't decided what it is.
We haven't decided, so like who knows? Depends how quick you edit this, but it'll either be up or it won't. So we'll leave it there. But
nice one, mate.
Good to chat again, mate. Nice to be back on the cast after what was it, about 6 weeks or
something
8?
like that.
It's been a while, so nice to chat with you, mate.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I'm inspired to crack on.
Yeah, just do one thing at a time. Focus. All right, mate. Chat to you soon.
See you later.
Bye.